Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome back to my workshop. Now, I've recently been interested in designing and printing my own logbooks for astronomy rather than using the shop-bought notebooks that I currently use. And that's led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole in bookbinding, which I know very little about, but I've decided that in order for this to be successful, I need to be able to bind these logbooks that I'm printing and creating. So in this video, I'm going to be building a couple of jigs that will help me in my bookbinding adventure. Let's get tinkering. In common with most of my projects, I'm using what I've got available. So here I've got part of an old wall cabinet that was in the kitchen, and these pieces are part of an old kitchen chair, and I've then got some M6 bolts and washers and so on. The bolts are actually from this old chair. The notebooks are going to be A5, so I've also got my prototype forms, which I'm going to use just to make sure that everything that I make is large enough to be able to bind an A5 notebook. Now you can see when you fold over a number of A4 pages to make them A5 that you start to get this point at the edge, and I want to be able to trim this. So the first thing that I'm going to build is a little clamp that will hold all the pages together so that I can then trim them up with the knife. This board will become the clamp that the knife runs along. So I'm going to cut a 45-degree edge on it so that it's easier to see what I'm doing with the knife. And then using my recently adjusted sliding table, I trim up the ends and cut off the tenons. I carefully sand off the teeth from an old hacksaw blade. This old hacksaw blade is going to act as a knife guard so that the knife doesn't cut into the piece of wood. I could screw it in, but then I'll be left with screws sticking out, and the wood is quite thin here, so I don't think that's a good idea. So I'm just going to use some epoxy to glue it in place. I add some masking tape to help with the positioning of the blade. I make up some 5-minute epoxy and then apply it to the blade. I then use some masking tape to act as a clamp. While that's drying, I can work on the clamping board. First I mark up the board, then cut it out on the table saw. I use a small amount of double-sided tape to temporarily fix the clamp to the board. With the two pieces stuck together, I can now drill pilot holes through both pieces, thus ensuring that they line up. I've been a little unlucky here. Underneath I've got a hole here from some mounting hardware, and the drill hole has come through just right on the edge, so I'm going to have to fill this and then re-drill it. Whilst the filler is drying, I start work on the sewing jig. I've set the blade angle to 15 degrees and the blade height to half the height of the thickness of this piece of wood. So this next cut is going to make a cut up here like this, and I'm now worried that when it cuts all the way through that this piece might fall onto the blade and then come shooting back. So I'm going to glue a piece on the top of here just to hold the two pieces together so that it doesn't fall. And now for the grand reveal. What I've created are two pieces like this that I can put the spine of the book in, and then this piece is going to clamp on top of it to hold that spine in place. So I've set up a temporary fence so that I can move this piece along like this, and it'll always be the same distance away. And I've made marks from the centre going out every inch. And these are going to be the guides for my sewing holes. When I come to sew my books, I drill these bottom holes first and then use those as a guide to drill the holes on the other piece. I then add a countersink to all of the holes. I then drill a shallow hole with a Forstner bit to accommodate the head of the bolt. I now drill out the end two holes so that they'll fit the bolt. With this piece filled and sanded, I can now re-drill this hole. And I can now remove the clamp from the board. And I drill out the holes to accommodate the bolt heads. The filler wasn't completely hard, so I now need to leave this to dry properly, and then I'll refill it again and have another go. So I refilled the hole and this time left it overnight to harden, and I've also clamped the board to the table of the pillar drill this time, so hopefully nothing can go wrong. Unfortunately, for some reason the camera didn't record, but you can see it's left a nice hole, so my strategy worked. I can now bore out the pilot hole to accommodate the bolt. And I do the same with the clamp itself. I can now add the last two bolts for a dry fit. So let's see how this works. I've got my notebook, which in this case is just made up of my prototype forms, as this is only a test. The crease that's been made with the notebook goes into the centre of the jig, and it needs to be centralised, which is about there. We then just place the clamp on top to hold all the pages in place and add the wing nuts. Do the same the other side. Now I'm doing this for the first time, so I'm by no means a bookbinding expert. I'm very much a novice. What I'm now going to do is just drill these holes out. You could use a bradawl or a sharp point or something, but I'm going to use the drill. I'm not going to do the ones that are closest to the edge, but I'm going to do the others. The key thing, as I understand it, is to have a hole in the middle. Now I can remove it from the clamp and begin my sewing. Now ideally I'd have a cover on this book as well from a bit of cartridge paper or something, but I haven't got that, and I can actually see here that my holes don't appear to be in exactly the right place, which is not good, but we'll see what happens when I sew it up. I'm going through the middle, and I want to leave a little bit to tie up, so about that much left. And now I'm just going to go up and down until I get to the one end. So through the hole, through the hole, through the hole. And now I'm going to go back down the middle of the hole. I'm starting to pull them tight now. Going back up towards the middle, and there we go. Take the pin off. I just need to do a reef knot or a granny knot. Cut off the excess. This is just normal cotton. That seems to work. So I need to adjust this slightly. I just need to tweak it on the table saw because the holes aren't quite on the crease. But that's achievable. So then the second part of this is I take my bound book, loosen this clamp, put it in here, line up the edges and clamp it down. Move this so you can see it better. And now I can cut it with my Stanley knife. Now I should probably be using a craft knife, but I'm going to use the Stanley knife. This one is very sharp because it was a new blade, but it looked a bit corroded. So I sharpened it on my sharpening stone. The trick is to go through slowly, apparently, not to try and do them all at once. There we have a nicely flat-edged book, which is now easy to flick through. It wasn't easy to flick through before because you got halfway through the book and then the bevel was on the other side, so you couldn't flick. So that's worked really well. Now, I'm a little bit disappointed with where the holes have come. I obviously need to do something about that. So I'm going to redo this cut, just creeping up on it until I get it right. So what that little bit of tweaking on the table saw has done has meant that these holes are right in the dead centre of this crease, and they're right in the dead centre of this crease. So now when I drill pamphlets, they'll come out exactly right. Okay, so you've seen me bind my prototype notebook, which is just full of the prototype forms. This is actually going to be one of my notebooks. This is going to be my equipment log. It's all printed up, ready to go. And now with my modified sewing jig, hopefully the holes will be in the right place. So I'm putting the folded sheets together. I'm centralising them in the jig so that I get a hole in the middle, and they're creased, and the crease is in the dip of the V there. Now let's clamp these up. And now let's drill them out. I'm leaving the two on the edge because they're too close to the edge. Let's first remove them from the jig. And now you can see they're right along the crease, which is exactly what I wanted. I'm now going to do the sewing again. We start in the middle. We need a piece of thread to tie to. Put these through here. I'm going to leave about that much, it's plenty. And then all I'm going to do is go up and down, up to the top first, putting it nice and tight, down back through, back up again, and now I'm going to go down through here, making sure I don't actually splice the thread that's already there. Go through, pull it nice and tight. And now I'm going to keep going up and down, pulling it nice and tight until I get all the way to the bottom. Now I'm at the bottom of the page. I'm going to thread it all the way back up to the middle. Again, pulling it tight each time. Now I'm at the middle. I just need to tie these in a knot. Ideally you want the knot in the middle just because it'll look nicer. I think they're in quite the right place, but then I guess practice will get me better at this. I have a few more of these notebooks to make for different purposes in my observatory. And that's the book bound. What I've also got is this cover, and my first sheet of paper is just a blank piece of paper that I'm going to glue to the cover, and then what I'll end up with is a book like this that I can then trim. So my next step is to apply the glue. So I'm just using PVA glue, probably the same sort of stuff that you use for wood glue, but this is specifically for paper. I'm just going to spread it out. I'm just going to glue my bound book onto the cover. I've got a little glue on the cover. I don't know what impact that's going to have, so I'm just going to try and wipe it off with a damp cloth. Okay, so now the last thing to do is just to press this down. So I've left this overnight. Let's see if it's dry. It looks dry. I have my notebook with my various forms in it. All I now need to do is just trim the edge like we did before, and then I will have made my first bona fide book. I think I might modify this clamp next time I use it and just add a straight edge along here like this, so that I've always got a square edge to push the book up against. I think that might make it just a little bit easier to use maybe. I'm just going to cut through these. I'm just using the weight of the knife, not really adding any pressure. That's it, through. And there we have it. My very first bound book. You could call it like a textbook really. It's a little bit like a school textbook. I'm really pleased with that. So here I am with my first ever bound book. And I have to say, This is going to sound a bit silly, but it feels quite magical having made my own book. I can't really describe why I think it's magical, but it does feel like a real sense of achievement. And it's a silly thing because it was actually quite an easy thing to do. And I'm really pleased. I've got a few more of these to make with different forms in to complete my logbook system for astronomy. That's not for this channel. I may well put something on my astronomy channel about that. But if you've enjoyed this video and you haven't already, then please subscribe. It makes a world of difference. And if you have enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up. If you've got any questions or comments about the jigs that I've made or my adventures in bookbinding, or if you are a bookbinder and can give me some advice, then please pop them in the comments. Thanks for watching.